For the 1992 Cowboys, the catch to playing the 49ers in the NFC Championship game was the catch. I see it 10 times a day, Emmitt Smith says. I can't turn on the TV without seeing it. If it wasn't for the media, no one on the team would give the catch a second thought. Smith had been 12 years old on January 10, 1982, when 49er receiver Dwight Clark rose out of the mud into the fog and came down in the back right corner of Candlestick Park's end zone with a high pass from Joe Montana. Montana and Clark had killed the Wicked Witch, San Francisco 28, America's team 27. Coach Bill Walsh's kids had beaten Coach Tom Landry's Supermen. San Francisco fans remained in a delirious fog as the 49ers went on to win their first of 4 Super Bowls in 4 appearances. The Cowboys did make it back to the NFC title game the following strike-shortened season, but lost badly to Washington 31-17. They played only 2 more playoff games in Landry's regime, losing to the Rams in 83 and 85. What if Clark hadn't held on to a pass that, according to many Cowboys, Montana was trying to throw away? What if the Cowboys had gone on to beat the Bengals in that January 1982 Super Bowl? Would the Cowboys still have crumbled toward 1-15? Now the 92 Cowboys had an opportunity to reverse history, to avenge the catch, to do to the 49ers what San Francisco did to Tom Landry's Cowboys. The similarities between that game and this one were amazing. Like Johnson, Bill Walsh was a college coach who took over a terrible team. The Niners were the youngest team in the league in 81, as the Cowboys were in 92. Both teams started 3 rookies on defense. Troy Aikman was where Montana was, a young quarterback yet to prove himself. It was all intriguing, but not to the Cowboys. "Screw the catch," said Nate Newton. "We have enough to worry about with Jerry Rice and Steve Young. This team doesn't worry about last week or next week. It's all about this week." Jimmy Johnson wouldn't play along either. Johnson's theme for the 49er game was, "Don't worry about how muddy the field might be Sunday. Focus on exactly what it will take to beat the 49ers. No distractions." Jerry Jones had warned Johnson about the pep rally. Jones said, "I told Jimmy the week before the Eagles game that we really wanted to do something special if we won. He said, 'Is this necessary?' I said, 'Yes.' But it wasn't a Jimmy thing. Any coach would have felt the same way. He just didn't want anything to break concentration, and that's understandable." At first, several on Jones's staff were skeptical. A Thursday night pep rally at Texas Stadium for a pro football team? Wouldn't it be a little embarrassing if only 10 or 12,000 showed up in a 65,000-seat stadium? Jones thought they'd get 165,000. The coaches called it the fucking pep rally. None of the assistant coaches attended. Though Jones considered it mandatory for the players, 15 came up with excuses, some of which might even have been valid. Johnson was basically under orders to show up and make some brief remarks to the crowd. Jones drove his staff to the edge, quickly spreading the word to every media outlet in Dallas-Fort Worth that this was going to be the mother of all pep rallies. Parking and admission were free, and all Cowboy merchandise in the pro shop would be discounted. Any and everybody was welcome to come to Texas Stadium for a Cowboy love-in. Under Tex Schramm, the old Cowboys had basically been a private party at Landry's Cathedral. A weeknight pep rally would have been inconceivable. But again, Jones's instincts were right. The Cowboys had suddenly given Dallasites a reason to shake hands, to slap backs, propose toasts, feel great about themselves again. About 5,000 seats just below the press box had been blocked off for a fireworks display, so the actual stadium capacity that night was closer to 60,000. By the time the Cowboy cheerleaders performed just after 7, Texas Stadium actually appeared to be full. Later, stadium officials admitted that the night turned into a fire marshal's nightmare, people sitting in every aisle and, in many cases, 2 to a seat. The official turnstile count was 69,609, which meant 10,000 people did not have seats. Police estimated that another 25,000 were trying to get into the stadium and couldn't. All parking lots were full, so after 7, traffic backed up for several miles in all directions with nowhere to go but home. The ex-Cowboy stars who first addressed the throng appeared to be genuinely startled and moved by its size and its intensity. Roger Staubach told the crowd, "If we'd had a pep rally like this, we would have beat the Steelers." Tony Dorsett followed and agreed. The one man in the stadium who did not appear too excited was Jimmy Johnson. As he walked onto the field, he reluctantly agreed to do a TV interview. He looked as if he had just been forced to kiss Jones on the lips. The rally was enjoyment for the fans, he said, but he had work to do. Many of the players were prepared to be as bothered by this obligation as their coach, but, standing together at the back of the stage, the NFL's youngest team appeared to be swept up in the emotion. Players raised their arms to the biggest Texas Stadium crowd they had ever experienced. Michael Irvin told the crowd, "We have more people here than most teams have at football games. That's why most teams are at home, and we're going to San Francisco." But probably the most emotion-packed line was delivered by, of all killjoys, the Cowboy coach. Johnson told the fans he would ask them just what he asked the players in a meeting. "Are you satisfied?" On the surface, of course, he was asking if just getting to the NFC Championship game was enough. But Johnson is just calculating enough to be asking a deeper question. Are you satisfied enough with the joy I'm giving you to accept me for what I am? For Jones, the rally was vindication. He said, "I saw a lot of young people out there. A new generation is taking hold. So we built a lot of equity Thursday night. The 49ers will read about it too. Maybe they'll all want to play for the Cowboys and be part of this." As the Cowboys arrived in San Francisco, Charles Haley was already wearing his game glower. He didn't need much motivation. He was going back to the field of his dreams and his nightmares. There was a lot of anger in Charles Haley, and the only way to get it out was to play the 49ers. Dave Wannstedt was trying to live two frantic lives. He was trying to prepare for his biggest test as a defensive coordinator while trying to decide whether to become head coach of the New York Giants. He couldn't quite feel comfortable with going to New York and retooling the Giants. They had some old players, and he dreaded having to get rid of some big names and seeing the big headlines that would cause in New York. Wannstedt was more intrigued by the Chicago Bears vacancy, but doubted the job would be offered to him, although New York's interest in him probably increased his value in Chicago. Wannstedt appeared calmer about defensing the 49ers and super receiver Jerry Rice and quarterback Steve Young than about deciding on the Bears or the Giants job. A key to his planning was separating the 49ers from the football. If the Cowboys hit hard enough, Wannstedt guaranteed they would force turnovers, and they needed turnovers to win in San Francisco. Candlestick Park was no picture postcard for the 1:05 p.m. kickoff. Rain turned the crowd into a sea of yellow ponchos in a 50-degree chill. New green sod made the center of the field relatively firm, but closer to the sidelines was mostly mud. The 49ers won the toss and moved quickly after the kickoff. On the first play, Cowboy cornerback Kevin Smith banged up his shoulder and dragged it temporarily to the sideline. That put Ike Holt on Jerry Rice, and a couple of plays later, Rice blew right past Holt on a post route, 63 yards for a touchdown. It looked all too easy. "You wonder," Norv Turner said later, "if we would have been able to recover from something like that." The Cowboys didn't have to. San Francisco guard Guy McIntyre was called for holding Haley. The 63-yard touchdown became a 1st and 20. It would be that kind of day. Kevin Smith hustled back into the game and immediately broke up another bomb to John Taylor. The 49ers had to punt. But the 49ers wouldn't let Smith run and enable Aikman to set up his passing game. Norv Turner admitted later that he almost abandoned his plan to keep running Smith at the 49ers. San Francisco held a 7-3 lead when Thomas Everett introduced himself thunderously to Ricky Watters at the end of a 16-yard run. Watters fumbled. The Cowboys recovered. Perhaps they were thinking, just like Dave said. Then the Cowboys ran what was probably the most important play of the day for Norv Turner's psyche. On a toss left, Smith gained 4 yards. He might as well have gained 114, his eventual total. Turner regained confidence in the running game and came right back to Smith for another 14 yards. Soon the Cowboys had 3rd and goal on the 49ers' 7-yard line. Aikman found no one open and appeared to throw the ball away, preserving a field goal attempt. But in a puzzling interpretation of rules, an official called holding on 49er lineman Pierce Holt. Actually, Holt did more than hold Smith. He tackled him. But the play had begun with Aikman faking a handoff to Smith. In a split second, how was Holt to decide that Smith didn't have the ball and was a potential receiver? That kind of year. On 1st and goal from the 2, Smith bounced left and scored. It was Dallas 10-7. In the second half, Dallas clung to a 17-13 lead. Then, for 9 minutes, they held the ball. 9 long Pasadena here-we-come minutes of Turner and Aikman, big brother and little brother, one as hot calling plays as the other was executing them. Nothing spectacular. Nothing worthy of Jerry Rice or Joe Montana. Just basic plays flawlessly executed at unpredictable times. Just 4 third-down conversions, the last a little pass to Emmitt Smith, who shot 16 yards for a touchdown. But as frustrated as they were, the 49ers didn't quit and stopped Smith on a 4th and 1 on their 12. Had Johnson gone for a field goal, he would have given Dallas a 14-point lead with 7 minutes left. But all year the Cowboys' style had been go for it. They played to win, not to avoid losing. 9 plays later, the 49ers scored and cut the lead to 24-20. But again, Turner did not play to avoid losing. On 1st and 10 from the Cowboy 21, he called a fairly safe flat pass, but all the same, he was putting the ball in the air and potentially up for grabs. Aikman threw a strike to Alvin Harper on a quick slant. Until that moment, the footing had been good. But finally someone slipped. 49er cornerback Don Griffin. 70 yards later, the Cowboys were set up for the touchdown that would make the final score 30-20. Cowboy safety James Washington ended San Francisco's hopes with an interception. As the Cowboy offense ran off the rest of the clock, tackle Eric Williams began to pump his arms and celebrate. But in the huddle, Aikman jumped on Williams and told the offense, "Look, show some class. These guys dominated the 80s and always won with class. Let's show them some respect and act like we've been here before." Johnson's teams have always been known for gloating. But with these orders to the huddle, Aikman showed it was no longer just Johnson's team. He was setting the tone now, at least for the offense. Arriving in Dallas, through the plane windows, players could see nothing but crazed Cowboy fans, thousands of them. The arrival area was small and purposely isolated, but now, around midnight, signs echoing Johnson's locker room chant after the game read, "How about them Cowboys?" The pilots had to radio for police reinforcements. It took over an hour to get all the players and coaches free of the mob and the traffic jam. The only person who did not seem to mind was Jerry Jones, who continued to circulate through the pawing revelers with the championship trophy. Cowboy staffers worried because Jones had no police protection. "No," said Jones, "I was fine. I wanted as many people as possible to be able to touch that trophy." 2 nights after the San Francisco game, Tony Wise flipped on the TV. There on his screen was the new head coach of the Chicago Bears, Dave Wannstedt, answering questions at his kickoff press conference in Chicago. It was a strange experience watching his best friend. Wannstedt came across as a big, tough guy who is in command. Back in Dallas, for Johnson and Wannstedt, the immediate problem became which assistants would stay or go to Chicago after the Super Bowl. It was assumed Wise would go with his friend. Wannstedt also wanted nickel defense coach Bob Slowick, who went to high school with Wannstedt in Pittsburgh. Later that week, Johnson walked into a coaches' meeting just in time to hear several assistants talking about who was and who was not going to Chicago. Johnson threw a fit. According to a source, he said, "Hell with all of you. Why don't you just all get the hell to Chicago?" The reaction was understandable, considering that the Cowboys did have one more fairly important game against Buffalo. But for Wannstedt and Wise, Johnson's anger cut deeper. Their friendship flew apart that week, leaving Wise especially disillusioned. For several days, Johnson quit talking to the two guys he called two of my very few close friends. On the Sunday flight to Los Angeles for the Super Bowl, for the first time all season, Rhonda Rookmaker sat next to Johnson. For the first time, too, Wannstedt's wife Jan flew with the team. Johnson and Wannstedt had an excuse not to sit next to each other, a very convenient excuse since they weren't speaking. Wise was hesitant to talk about his wounded feelings. As close as he was to Wannstedt, Wise wasn't quite as anxious as people thought to follow him to Chicago. It wasn't that easy, after all the work and suffering, to walk away from a team that could dominate the 1990s. Wise also had a new girlfriend, a flight attendant on the team charters. But he realized his friendship with Johnson was only a working relationship. As long as Wise contributed to Johnson's success, helped turn Johnson's offensive line into one of the best, and occasionally made Johnson laugh, he was Johnson's friend. Asked how emotional it was to break up the old gang, Wise said, "Oh, for me it is. For Dave it is. But it's a one-way street." By Friday of the week before the game, the Cowboy coaches realized they had won the Super Bowl, barring total collapse. The AFC's Buffalo Bills simply weren't in the NFC's league. True, they had won at San Francisco and at New Orleans, but most Cowboy coaches simply didn't think Buffalo could stop their offense or avoid turnovers against their defense. For Johnson, this didn't lead to overconfidence. It drove him. He didn't want to just win the Super Bowl. He wanted to dominate it. He gave a speech to his players that was equal parts Patton, Rockne, and Academy Award Jimmy. It made rookie kicker Lynn Elliott ready to play right there. Elliott wished he were more than a kicker. Dave Wannstedt was asked if his taking the Chicago job might deflate his defensive team. Wannstedt grinned. "I told them this will be our last week together and that coaches get jobs because players play hard. One thing about these guys is they've always responded." With my modesty, I have a hard time saying it, but Kenny Norton already told me all the guys were talking about really laying it on the line one last time. Even a lame duck defensive coordinator had turned into an advantage. Incredibly, for this game, even Norv Turner was confident. After studying the 49er game and hearing from coaching friends around the league, Turner was ready to admit he had underestimated his offense. Turner finally agreed Smith and Novacek were the best players in the league at their positions. Irvin thought he was the best, and Aikman kept throwing to Irvin as if he were the best. The offensive line made the Cowboys a power running team that could also throw. So was it Dallas by 4 touchdowns? Turner just smiled a rare, confident smile. Johnson had begun reading a book given him by psychologist Don Beck, Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience. Normally, Johnson isn't much of a reader, but when asked at a press conference if he had any scholarly tendencies like Buffalo coach Marv Levy, Johnson was quick to talk about flow. The concept is basically flowing through fear by ignoring it. It's the ability to concentrate only in your current time frame. Johnson was intrigued by the notion of learning to enjoy the pain required to reach a goal. So he was trying to enjoy the inevitable pain of Super Bowl week, the distractions, the potential incidents or injuries, the owner. Johnson was more relaxed and upbeat than he had been since, well, probably the staff's off-season trip to the Bahamas. That first night in L.A., he took Rhonda out to dinner and gave his team the night off without curfew. Johnson had warned his team that the first practice in L.A. at UCLA's field would be the most physical of the year. Quite possibly, it was rougher than the game they were about to play. The player dominating practices was Troy Aikman. More and more of his teammates were saying that he had arrived as the undoubted leader of the team. They were now Troy's boys. Nate Newton provided a balanced view of Aikman's evolution, if not revolution, from the Washington loss on. Newton said, "Coach Johnson challenged us as a team, and we could have folded, but we answered the bell." But Troy, it really did something to him personally. He felt like the team was all on his shoulders, and it gave him new confidence. He talked more. He started feeling like the players around him were believing in him, and it really loosened him up as a player. I had new respect for him. Troy went from having a good year to having a great one. For Aikman, Super Bowl week was a perfect week. Everyone who mattered in his life had come to L.A., and he had managed to find time for them. He felt completely comfortable with the game plan and his ability to execute against the Bills. In the 5 weeks since the Bears game, his feelings about his leadership role and his team had changed dramatically. For the first time, he felt in control of a team that had matured fast through the playoffs. The night before the game, Aikman was so calm he felt giddy. So about midnight, he called a buddy and they talked until about 1. Then the buddy suggested that Troy should get some sleep. Aikman doubted that he could. But he surprised himself with the best night's sleep he had had before any game all year. The way things were going, how could he expect anything else? On game day, as the players spread out in rows to stretch, Johnson walked among them in his Jimmy Johnson model cowboy jacket and white turtleneck. This was charming Jimmy, clapping, joking, slapping shoulder pads with encouragement, radiating confidence. He often leaned over to deliver some personal inspiration to a player. Johnson even hugged Steve Berline, Kelvin Martin, and yes, Charles Haley. Just 6 weeks earlier, assistants had privately promised that Haley would not be back next year. Now, even Johnson was beginning to warm to number 94. In the locker room, Johnson's final emotional remarks included a promise that Buffalo will turn the ball over. A prophetic statement? Partly, perhaps. But Johnson and his coaches did believe the Bills wouldn't be quite prepared for Dallas's defensive quickness and intensity. At that moment, though, the Cowboys' biggest problem was that Aikman wasn't prepared for the quickness and intensity of the surreal world he was about to re-enter. As he heard himself being introduced and felt himself jogging onto the Rose Bowl turf, his heart began to pound, and he began to hyperventilate. The leader of pro football's youngest team was suddenly feeling and acting his age. Buffalo began calmly and confidently and forced an early Dallas punt. For the first time all season, rookie linebacker Robert Jones lined up as a punt team blocker and missed his assignment. Steve Tasker, Buffalo's version of Dallas's Bill Bates, head faked and cut inside Jones, who did not touch him. For the first time in 53 games and 220 punts, Mike Saxon heard the sickening sound of the double hit, foot against ball, ball against flesh. 5 plays later, Thurman Thomas scored from 2 yards out. Buffalo led 7-0. It took Dallas a little longer than usual to respond, but Aikman's 20-yard strike to Irvin on a 3rd and 16 seemed to settle him down. 2 plays later, his receivers executed perfectly, leaving Novacek open. Aikman led him into the end zone. The score was tied at 7. But not for long. An illegal block on the kickoff set Buffalo back on its own 10-yard line. Charles Haley had been saying on the sidelines that Buffalo, going without a huddle, kept snapping the ball on the first sound quarterback Jim Kelly made. Haley was determined to get Kelly. This time, Haley lined up on the left side against All-Pro tackle Howard Ballard and guessed right on the snap count. Ballard barely touched him before he creamed Kelly. The ball popped straight into the mitts of defensive end Jimmy Jones at the 2. Jones suddenly found himself in the end zone for a touchdown. Now it was Buffalo's turn to respond, and they did. Almost. Kelly found receiver Andre Reed for 40 yards, but Larry Brown didn't give up and caught Reed at the Dallas 4. It was a key tackle. On 3rd down from the 1, linebacker Ken Norton bolted into a hole and came chin to chin with running back Kenneth Davis just short of the goal line. It was a big stop, but a bigger statement. You ain't tough enough, Buffalo. On 4th down, Buffalo coach Marv Levy chose to pass for a touchdown rather than try a field goal. Kelly rolled right into the path of defensive end Tony Tolbert and lobbed a jump ball towards 6'7" tight end Pete Metzelaars. But it fell short into the hands of 5'9" Thomas Everett, who intercepted. For Buffalo, 4 downs inside the Dallas 5 had become pointless. A few plays later, Norton flew over a blocker and crashed into Kelly's oft-injured knee, spraining it and ending Kelly's season. In came Frank Reich, a guy the Dallas coaches thought was as good as Kelly. Reich had guided Buffalo's astonishing playoff comeback from 35-3 down against Houston a month earlier. Reich's Bills cut the lead to 14-10. But Turner and the Cowboy offense were settling into a comfort zone. Emmitt Smith shot through a crease for 38 yards. Then Michael Irvin threw a hard inside move on cornerback Nate Odoms, spinning Odoms just in time to see Aikman's bullet stick in Irvin's hands for a 19-yard touchdown. Dallas 21-10. Buffalo tried again, but now Wannstedt was starting to send blitzers after Reich, speeding the tempo, attacking. Thurman Thomas was broadsided by Leon Lett and fumbled. Dallas had the ball deep in Buffalo territory. Quickly, Turner called a post-corner route to Irvin, but Michael got excited and cut the angle too fast. Aikman had to throw before he was set. It was an unbelievably athletic play. 18 yards and another Dallas touchdown, 28-10. The Bills did cut the lead to 31-17, but on a play that would have been nullified in the days of instant replay. A scrambling Reich was 2 yards beyond the line of scrimmage when he released a 40-yard touchdown pass to Don Beebe. No matter. For the Cowboys, all heaven was breaking loose. The Super Bowl had unfolded just as the season had. Early doubt and dissension, refocused faith, dramatic transformation, dominance that surprised even the Cowboys and their coaches. No one expected to beat Buffalo 52-17. Nobody thought defensive players Jimmy Jones, Ken Norton, and almost Leon Lett would score touchdowns. Nobody thought Larry Look-Ma-No-Hands Brown would intercept a pass. Not even Johnson thought Buffalo would commit 9 turnovers. But no Cowboy was surprised when Haley and Newton dumped an entire Gatorade cooler on Johnson's hair, and it basically didn't move. Emmitt Smith couldn't stand it. He would not be denied the satisfaction just once of seeing Johnson's hair completely messed up. He stepped in and rubbed it as if he were giving Johnson a shampoo. Finally, it was okay for everyone on the team to applaud and laugh. Even Johnson laughed. The team had come a long way from Washington. There, for the nation to see on NBC, was Jerry Jones hugging Jimmy Johnson on a makeshift stage in a locker room overrun with 100 Prince Bandars. NBC's Bob Costas asked Jones what had been the key move in turning around the Cowboys. "Hiring Jimmy Johnson," Jones said, smiling. But when photographers asked the Buddies from Arkansas to hold the Super Bowl trophy, Jones pulled it from Johnson's grasp and thrust it aloft in his right hand. Johnson's smile changed slightly from ecstasy to amusement, but nothing was going to ruin the feeling he was feeling. As Super Bowl most valuable player Troy Aikman returned to his hotel, he realized that he didn't have any plans. He had been completely focused on the game. First, he went to his room by himself and ordered some beer from room service. He was waiting for something incredible to happen. He began calling the many friends and family members who had been at the game, but he couldn't reach anyone. No, they were all out celebrating Troy's game. They all assumed the MVP would be too swamped to see them. There alone sat the star of the most watched TV show in history. An estimated 133.4 million people had seen Super Bowl 27. It wasn't until the following morning, when Aikman talked to his sister, that something happened he will never forget. She told him that the night before, his father had said, "I'm as proud as I've ever been in my life." Troy had worked his entire life for his dad to tell him something like that. At least his dad had told his sister and his mom. Aikman said, "Knowing my dad, that was incredible for him to say. That was the best thing that happened." Winning the Super Bowl MVP was making Aikman's life more complicated and, at times, confusing. For one thing, he couldn't be sure if Jimmy Johnson really had come to care about him or deeply believe in him. Had Johnson kept telling the media how great Aikman had become just to prop up the quarterback's confidence? Would Johnson now somehow take credit for being the psychologist who finally brought out the best in Aikman? Would manipulating Aikman's emotions be Johnson's goal for the '93 season? Aikman remains wary of Johnson. A close friend of Aikman's says, "Troy just coexists with Jimmy now. They have a workable relationship, but they're never going to be close. After much squabbling, the Dallas City Council agreed on Tuesday, February 9th, for the Cowboys' Super Bowl victory parade. The police warned team officials that players riding in open convertibles, 2 per car, was not a good idea. Security would be much more effective around flatbed trucks with larger groups of players elevated above the fans. But organizers went with the classier convertibles. How many fans would show up at noon on a Tuesday? Nobody could know for sure, but Jerry Jones's Thursday night pep rally before the San Francisco game should have given everyone a hint. Police officials admitted later that they underestimated the manpower they would need. If, as estimated, 400,000 people gathered that day on Commerce Street, 300,000 were kids. Truancy rates topped 50% in many area high schools. These young celebrants had defied teachers' warnings about cutting school for the parade, so they weren't about to heed the sawhorse barricades or respect the many older fans who had staked out front-row Polaroid vantage points since dawn. The convertibles hadn't moved very far down Commerce when they were lost in an unruly rush of humanity and inhumanity. Thousands pushed and shoved and climbed all over the cars, which could no longer move. Hats were swiped off players' heads. Emmitt Smith took off his jewelry for fear it would be ripped off him. He said later that he honestly feared for his life. It didn't help that overmatched police officers with nightsticks drawn couldn't really see because of the 20 tons of ticker tape being dumped from office windows and the tops of buildings. A classic Corvette convertible overheated and caught fire. A swarm of celebrants attempted to overturn a police cruiser. TV anchors, commenting from their command posts, kept saying things like, "This isn't quite what anyone anticipated." It took an hour longer than expected for the parade to inch the 7 blocks down Commerce. As the players finally made it safely to a stage in front of City Hall, the throng pushed through restraining ropes and through police, took over a section of folding chairs reserved for dignitaries and the media, and threatened to rush the stage. The program was shortened considerably. Yet Johnson, the benevolent dictator, seemed to swell with the power of the crowd. He plugged into it, felt it momentarily in the palm of his hand. He told the crowd, "They say that victory has 100 fathers, while defeat is an orphan. We had a victory, and all of you can share in it." Twice more he emotionally asked the fans, "Are you satisfied? Are you satisfied?" Then he gave them what they wanted. "How about them Cowboys?" The crowd pushed forward. Quickly, Jones was asked to pose holding the Super Bowl trophy with Johnson. And once more, Jones snatched it out of Johnson's grip, turning and shaking it toward the players. Johnson kept smiling. "How about them JJs?" As the players were whisked to safety, thousands of people began to wander away through downtown streets toward bus stops and cars. Suddenly, gangs began attacking bystanders. Much of what happened was captured by TV photographers for all Dallas to see. The battles formed along visibly racial and ethnic lines. The most chilling scene? An unsuspecting high school-age female, a cheerleader type, was slugged in the face by a black male. Blood streaming from her nose and mouth, she teetered back to her feet and, looking disoriented, mumbled, "Somebody get me an ambulance." One voice yelled into a TV microphone, "LA had its riot. We didn't get ours here." Yes, a Dallas still divided into North and South by the Trinity River still has a race problem. A Super Bowl championship didn't magically solve that. Perhaps the kids who rioted viewed Super Bowl 27 far more realistically than many other Dallasites. To them, perhaps, it was just a big game. A Dallas victory wouldn't change their lives any more than it would Aikman's. So they had invaded the Cowboys stage to say, "How about us?" Actually, Dallas got off lucky. Many innocent bystanders were cut and bruised. Some shots were fired by police and some by troublemakers, but incredibly, no one was hit. No one was killed. It was that kind of year. After the celebrations in L.A., Dave Wannstedt and Tony Wise decided to go on to Chicago. They didn't quite feel part of the Cowboys anymore, and they had a new team and college crop to evaluate. How would it affect Johnson not to have Wise's buoyancy and Wannstedt's ability to motivate and mediate? Publicly, Johnson scoffed at the loss. Only once in his 15 years as a head coach had his staff remained intact through an off-season. He thought he had managed to do pretty well. About 3 weeks after the Super Bowl, Jones announced that he was giving Johnson a raise from about $550,000 a year to more than $1 million annually. That makes Johnson one of the league's 5 highest-paid coaches. All of the assistants were given raises, some token, but not Turner's. Turner, the new assistant head coach, felt that Jones had been completely fair with him. Some people connected with the team wished Jones would do things like that without first being backed into a corner. But that's Gerald Wayne Jones, who can't forget that a rent-a-car agent once cut his credit card in two. Soon after the raises were announced, Jones raised ticket prices an average of $6.42 across the board. Yet, when players and assistants thought Johnson had flown apart emotionally, Jones had been the most optimistic that Johnson would pull himself together. And Johnson had. Jones said that Johnson would create positive, "we'll show Jimmy" tension among the players. And Johnson had, by instinct or accident or maybe a little of both. At critical times, Jones was unbelievably patient and supportive. But he refused to let Johnson take over the franchise. He didn't give Johnson a bottomless budget or complete control of trading or drafting, but he let Jimmy be Jimmy. He gave Johnson more room to flex and flaunt his talent than a lot of owners probably would have, because Johnson had something Jones wanted: the ability to coach a Super Bowl winner. Yet Jones has something Johnson needs too: the yin to his yang, the antidote to his poisonous moods, the illogical positive to Johnson's high IQ skepticism. Johnson would never admit this, but General Manager Jones complimented the coach with sound trading, negotiating, and move-making instincts. Will Johnson ever be able to give Jones a little football credit and appreciate and enjoy their coach-general manager relationship? Probably not. But will Johnson ever get mad enough to quit? During the 1992-93 Cowboy season, team play-by-play announcer Brad Sham came up with a theory called the Joe Hardy theory. In Douglas Wallop's novel The Year the Yankees Lost the Pennant, Joe Hardy was a baseball fan who sold his soul to the devil to become a great athlete and win the World Series. The more the team won, Sham said, the more sense this theory made. Johnson had sold his soul, and being the deal maker Johnson is, he hadn't sold it for just one Super Bowl, but for 5 or 6 or 8. But maybe the devil drove a harder bargain than Sham figured. Maybe the devil said, "I'll give you a decade, Jimmy, but you and Jerry will be together forever."
The Boys was written by Skip Bayless and read by the author. It was abridged for audio by Jim Shokoff. The recording engineer was Tom Cassetta. The associate producer was Christine Jemay Nelson. The Boys was produced and directed by Karen Frillman.